Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and we have finally come to the last day of the Literary Theory Workshop March 2022. And as we draw our workshop to a close, as you all might know by now, we'll be discussing on erotica and pornographic studies today in terms of our literary theory pursuit. And before we get started with, I must spend some time on digressions and explanations. Talking about explanations, there were 4 videos that were shown today before we got started with. I had requested all of you to join by 5:50 and told you that it won't be the same way it used to be. But then, yeah, quite a few of you could join only a little bit later. There are still a few who haven't joined. Irrespective of all that, thank you for being here. And we showed 4 videos today. The first 2 were item numbers, one Chikini Chameli and the other one Mohamundiri from the movie Pokir Raja 2. And then there was a scene from Meenakshi Sundaresan, and that was as light and as subtle an introduction that I could have given to you on an academic frontier to the BDSM technique. And if you still don't know that, then you can Google that. And last but not the least was that iconic scene from the interval portion of Dirty Picture, starring Vidya Balan, which dealt with the alleged story and life of Silk Smitha. So, yeah, welcome today, welcome, and we'll be having hopefully a fruitful session on erotica, pornographic literature, and the art and the capitalistic intentions behind these things. And as again I told you before we get started with, there are a few things I'd like to talk to you about. And maybe before I take these digressions and the digressive route, let me ask you one simple thing. This is a very, very preliminary platform from which we have to get started with. Without being specific and particular and asking you about the tastes or experience and exposure or anything, on simple terms, there are only 2 questions that I want you to answer. One, what according to you is porn? Or what is your understanding of porn? And 2, what is your understanding of pornographic studies? 2 simple questions within an academic purview. 2 simple questions. If you could unmute yourself and briefly answer, what is porn? Or you could also speak about whether it is desirable or undesirable, whether it needs to be condemned or appreciated. And the second question is, what is your understanding about pornographic studies? If you could spend a minute or 2 on that, all of you together. Guys, somebody please begin so that others won't have that starting trouble. They would plunge deep into this. All right, depiction of primary sexual content. Oh, I just read content to be consent. I'm sorry. Okay, so depiction of primary sexual content is porn. And about pornographic studies, Kavya, if you could add a sentence on that as well. What exactly is pornographic studies? Just in case you have heard about it or you know about it, what exactly is pornographic studies? Others can chip in as well. The starting trouble has been eliminated. So just in case you want to add to it, you can unmute yourself and give your own perceptions about the same. And the major consideration also goes into the fact that all of us who are in this room right now are adults. Doesn't mean I'm going to talk adult content explicitly, but then yes, on a very preliminary level, it licenses us to talk about adult content, being adults, at least say 20 plus, 22 plus. All right. Anybody would like to join Kavya in the description? Not heard about it, but guess it's about the study of making and consumption of porn. Good for a start, Kavya. The study of making and consumption of porn, filming, selling, watching, listening, or sexually explicit content. Quite an interesting definition, that is. Quite an inclusive definition. Filming, selling, watching, listening of sexually explicit content. I would like to appreciate you for that hashtag or that bar, listening to sexually explicit content. There are quite a lot of visually disabled people in this world who seek that stimulation through auditory content as well and reading as well. I would like to say thanks for that observation as well. Reading the moment I put the term lit erotica in the poster, there were quite a lot of people who confused it with a site with that name called Lit Erotica, which is a consumer platform of pornographic reading content. And what I meant was erotic literature, not lit erotica per se, or the website per se. All right. Anybody else would like to chip in with some information that you would love to share or observations of yours? Any other additions or observations to what Kavya and Sarah has said? Any portrayal of sexual acts as porn can be any of the LSRW studies on the socio-economic influences of porn is pornographic studies. Yeah, kinda. Studies on the socio-economic influences on porn is pornographic studies, or maybe it's not. We'll come to that very shortly. Don't worry. Any other additions? I'm waiting and I'm stretching this because I want you all to be involved. This is not. I mean, this session won't be fruitful as long as you stay silent. This is not an obscene discussion. This is not a discussion where we are going to discuss about your sexual tastes, interests, or personal things, nor am I going to ask any of you out. That's not what we are going to do here. This is a purely academic discussion based on what we come across in our life, and we are probably trying to talk about that. What are you doubtful at, Manohar? I didn't get you. That? I didn't understand that.
My doubt is if whether pornographic studies is socio-economic influence of porn. I don't know what it is actually. I've never actually come across any paper or attended any seminars or webinar which actually had a presentation on this paper. So I'm not familiar. I'm just taking a guess that is it the study of socio-economic influence
Yeah,
of porn.
that's why I said whatever you say are partially true. I'm saying they are partially true because when we discuss a topic, there would be a lot of other possibilities coming forth. And that's the only reason why I said that. Sarah, we can't hear you. Maybe you can try again, perhaps.
So, according to me, it is the incorporation of literature which exposes the ill effects and all the odds and events regarding this.
Okay, good attempt. Exposes. Illicit is a rather controversial term. What is illicit? Is illicit or is illicit really illicit? Is always a problematic question. Again, if you bring in moral, ethical dimensions, religious dimensions, this illicit becomes really problematic. From a Christian vantage point of view, it is a cardinal sin. One of those cardinal sins, adultery. Yeah. The study of psychology behind porn, it's another interesting observation. The psychology behind porn, what goes into the making of porn, what goes into the consumption of porn, what goes into the perception or reception of porn. That's an interesting observation again, Kavya. The study of the psychology behind porn. What else could this be? What else could pornographic studies lead to? And Sarah, we could not hear you. Are you here? Yeah, you're still on. Yeah, now I think you have unmuted yourself, but I think we can't hear you. Sarah, I would recommend maybe you just log out and log in again. Maybe that would help. Yeah, she's done that immediately. So by the time she comes back, maybe we can spend another minute on this. If anybody would like to add to this.
I've heard that there are studies on sociology, anthropology, and psychology on the influence of porn, but never came across a study that actually deals with literature, or at least on a literary level. This is actually kind of new to me.
There are quite a lot of studies based on literature, Manohar. The thing is, it is new to you or new to us because we are relatively new to it. That's the best part about it. It's not that it doesn't exist, but in the sort of moralistic, academic world that we live in, often these are things that end up being taboo to us. And
I was just going to ask, is there a white taboo on these kind of studies here?
well, not in written perhaps, but then otherwise we do know the consequences when we talk about this. I can start the session by talking about my own experiences over the last 1 week or so. Sarah has rejoined.
Sir,
Yes,
could we
Monica.
consider the writings of Mills and Boons in this category?
Pretty much, it is of a light porn content, or if you could call it, it's a light fantasy. And again, fantasy is a word we'll come back to dispute a little while later. Thank you, Monica. Sarah, I can see that you're back. If your mic is
Hello,
functioning.
can
Yes,
you
we
hear
can
me
hear you
now?
now. Yes, very much, Sarah.
Okay. So I think that modern day pornography is actually really problematic. It only focuses on the male pleasure. It's very demeaning to women, and a lot of people watch only this and they get their information about sex from this, and which is why it's very misleading.
Thank you. That's a very good observation, and this is something I was also looking forward to among other observations. Thank you for that poignant observation. And it's not about modern day porn. Perhaps ever since the inception of porn, we could see that pornographic culture has been slightly misogynistic. Porn has always had this revenge instincts or this dominance attached to it, and it has always tried to be monotonous. That's why I don't know how many of you are familiar with with this terminology. There is this terminology called stag films, and no, the stag does not mean the deer, but then stag here means the films that are made only for male consumption, where women are objectified, where women are subjugated, where women are seen as only tools of oppression, and men, as well as the women over the films, derive pleasure out of what is being done to them. Such films are called stag films. There's an entire book written on that. I'll give you the link a little while later. Please be patient. So let's get started finally, 10 to 18 minutes into the session. Let's slowly get started. And as we get started, I was about to say, as a response to Mano, I was about to tell that let me begin with my own experiences over the last 1 week. As most of you know, there are certain individual sessions that we try to outsource in terms of giving entry to people who have not joined the workshop, but people who would like to attend a one-off session here and there. So Freddie, as he always does, made a poster, which you would have all seen, titled Lit Erotica and Contemporary Pornographic Studies. And it had written the date, fee, and everything, and my name and my photograph on that. And this was shared in plenty of groups and social media, in our own FB page, in my own Facebook account, in my own Insta account. Everywhere this was shared within colleagues and friends and WhatsApp groups. And the responses that I received is quite interesting to mention right here. I say interesting because it's in a way predictable, but then there are certain responses that really draws the significance of this session to me. There are people who did not even respond. The blue ticks coming and no replies. There are people who at least send a thumbs up when they see my messages. So there's not even a thumbs up there. There are people who kept on seeing this on my status and had no responses whatsoever. I personally rate that poster to be one of the best that Freddie had made in the last, say, a couple of months, perhaps. The layout and the design and the color combinations, maybe except for the fonts. I think it was one of the best posters that he's made. And when he made that, we were discussing that there is only two ways. Either people would rush looking at the topic and the poster, or they won't. And it's the latter that really happened. All of you who are here are people who have joined for the workshop. Nobody from outside has come to the session today. And no wonder, because this is circulated within India, within Kerala, and I could have no puzzlement regarding the responses. But then what comes into some predictable responses is that there are people who have come to me and using various techniques, as we say, try to urge me to not go behind such a venture or not to attempt this. And there are plenty of reasons, out of love, out of affection, out of concern, out of whatever else. In various strategies, they were like, why do you want to do this? You're so young and you are making a career out of this, and you are a male, and there is a high possibility of a risk that you end up being branded or or typecast. So don't you think you're going to talk about obscenity? Don't you think we shouldn't be discussing this in the academia? Don't you think porn is a taboo subject? And blah, 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 blah. And I was only giving a Buddha smile there, because I'm not sure how many of you at this point of time realize this, but pornographic studies, at least 70% of pornographic studies, is anti-porn in nature. Like most of you have mentioned in the chat box. It's more of a counter-resistance movement or a rebellion towards all the perils or all the evils that pornography embodies. So basically, pornographic studies are more like a no to porn. Though not all are there, because I can definitely give you a lot of stereotypical shocking examples from theory as well. But nonetheless, the moment I said I'm going to discuss pornographic studies, I decided to do that, or in their terms, I braved to do that because I believe pornographic studies is quite pertinent to the current academia. Why? I could list you a good number of reasons. One, I would like to quote Manoa. Like Manoa, I'm sure most of you would be new to this concept of pornographic studies in literature. Trust me, there are plenty of books which have come out as attempts to pornographic studies in literature. They may be purely uni based, as in literature based, or they could be multidisciplinary in research, as in imbibing psychological theories of Freud, Lacan, blah blah blah, and attempting a pornographic study. Or it could be another domain study, like he said, sociology. So that's one reason why I want you to be aware of this. Two, we come across quite a lot of cases on our day-to-day life on growing number of abuses, especially in the academia. Within the academia, we come across a lot of teachers who come under the radar or who come under the scanner of physical abuse. Recently, I think this month itself, we saw the head of the School of Drama in Thrissur getting arrested for molesting a student. And we know where this leads to, and we know how, in that sense, limited our academia is. So talking porn is not involving in porn. It's like saying I stand for PETA. I've experienced this before. Way back in 2010, 11, I suppose, 2010, 11. Back then, I used to be a short film maker as well. As a student, I used to be a short film maker, one of the pioneers of mobile filmography. Manoa knows that, he was my pal in that as well. So we used to make short films, and I made a short film which was probably the first attempt on the homosexual elements. It was the first gay short film in Malayalam. And YouTube back then removed it for adult content, saying that it is obscene to the standards of the contemporary society. I'm talking about a decade ago, 2010, 11. And mind you, there was no nude scenes there. There were some intimate scenes, but no naked or kissing scenes or intimate love-making scenes, nothing like that. Soft porn or softer porn, if you want to call that. So back then, YouTube had removed that, stating these privacy policies and other things. So back then itself, I know how people look at these sort of things. And these days, it is even more deeper. And when we think about our body, there is one thing that you must be aware of. There is something called body politics. Again, explored in various ways by various filmmakers. Let's take the case of a film like Blue is the Warmest Color. Or let's take a film like Antichrist by Louis von Trier. Or let's leave sexuality and nudity aside. Let's take a movie like, what was the name of that movie? John Abraham. Well, I forgot the name of that movie by John Abraham, where the corpse of a student who's murdered by the police floats in the rivers of Alleppey. I forgot the name of that movie. Was it Agrahartil Karuda or the other one? All right. So all these movies in one way or the other brings across this body politics. Even Dirty Picture tries to project body politics in a commercial way. Take the case of Lolita or Ice Candy Man. There are plenty of movies which deals with the body politics or sexuality, explicitly or implicitly. Again, based on how we conceived it, we label them in varied ways. We call them soft porns, we call them adult movies, we call them porns, we call them hardcore. We label them in varied ways. But nonetheless, I deem it a necessity to be aware of the way a consumer-based digital culture that we live in. I use the word digital. I'm not even using the word visual. The way digital culture has been dominating us, and the way porn is projected and in a way served to our mobiles or gadgets, or to a palm top, if I could use a better word. The way porn is served to our palm tops. So this makes it an absolute necessity to discuss pornographic studies in the contemporary times. And when I say pornographic studies, this does not simply involve, like most of you said, the study of porn. Also numerous videos on Pornhub, videos of real assault. It's almost important. Yeah, definitely. That's another aspect that we need to be aware of as well. When we speak about production of porn, we must also be aware of the fact that in the digi world that we live in, that we thrive in, not all porn is made, or not all porn is consensually produced. We are very much aware of the hidden web cameras and the demand for such so-called natural hidden encounters and all. So in such a context, this becomes a rather problematic thing as well, because again, individual choice and freedom again becomes problematized. So again, another movie that comes to my mind is Lens, a movie made in Tamil and Malayalam, produced by Lal Jose, is a movie on the leaking of a naked video and how a couple face this. So if you haven't watched that movie, it's an award-winning movie. You can go back and have a look at that movie. Yeah, so I was trying to tell you that the responses to the announcement of a talk on pornographic studies was varied in very different sense. There were people who tried to prevent me from attempting such things. There were people who said that AKademy, I would look at you from a different glance, without realizing that pornographic studies is not actually a pro-porn thing. I'm not saying that being pro-porn is bad either, because the moment we start to discuss pornographic studies, I'd have to discuss two icons with you. One I have already shown to you, Sunny Leone. The other one, the name that would come to your mind automatically, Mia Khalifa. At one end, we have someone like Sunny Leone, who has a manager and who manages these semi-porn or soft porn engagements of hers and makes money out of it and does charity and a lot of other things, and who is all proud of the work that she does. On the other side, we have someone like Mia Khalifa, who comes out of that Pornhub industry and goes on to declare that she was drugged and forcefully made to do whatever you saw, and she was not someone who would advocate these porn industry's tactics. So with two vantages which is relatable to us, it is quite difficult to say whether we should be pro-porn or anti-porn. But nonetheless, on a preliminary level, there are quite a lot of studies that are being conducted to porn, its consumption, the way it is received, the way it is sold, and so on and on and on. And it is one of the most money-making industries in the world right now. That's needless to say. Every human being, they say, spend a good share of their money on sexuality, if not porn, on sexuality. Whether it is medicinal, or whether it is consumption of videos, or whether it is prostitution or brothels, or whether it is making of adult content, a huge part of money involvement comes through sexuality. And without much ado, because I would keep on digressing, there are quite a lot of digressions that I could add to this. So without much digressions, let me get started with a simple question. When did the word porn come into existence? You would be amazed to know the answer. I repeat, when did the word porn come into existence? For Indians, it is quite easy to remember because it is a landmark year in the history of Indian independence. Yeah, in the meanwhile, I also got reminded while talking about the significance of this talk today. I must also remind you that we are the land of Kama Sutra. We are the land of temples with naked gods and all the sort of sexual positions instilled in the towers. But despite that, we consider sexuality to be a discrete thing, just like we saw in that interval scene in Dirty Picture. And similarly, we try to perceive porn as a Western cultural byproduct. So these are also things that you need to keep in mind while we discuss porn. All right. So the word porn first appeared in the Oxford Dictionary in the year 1857. I'm sure most of you may be taken a little bit aback when I say 1857, but then that is a reality. And I would like to give you a couple of additions to that reference. Just give me a second. Oh my God, where did I save that? It was 1857 is all that I remember. There was a specific meaning attached to it. Just give me a second. Where on earth did I save it? Just a second. Let me share that link. The word pornography appeared for the first time in the Oxford English Dictionary in 1857, and most of the English variations on the word pornographer and pornographic date from the middle of the end of the 19th century. And the words emerged in French a little sooner, and it was initially related to refer to the writing about prostitution. It was initially used to refer to the writings on prostitution and art related to obscene writing or images dated from the 1830s and 1840s. And mind you, this should give you an idea into a fact that pornography is a recent phenomenon, maybe less than 2 centuries older. And when we speak about pornography, there is another misconception that would come to your mind. Go back to all the chats that we've had so far today. The discussions has been primarily about the pornographic adult content in the web or the videos that we consume. But we must identify the fact that pornography did not emerge in a graphical form. Even though we say pornography and graph means a visual representation, the inception of pornography was more as a creature, as writings. We look at the early part of novels, whatever novels that we come across, take the case of Clarissa or Pamela or Tom Jones, we could all see quite a lot of explicit adult content in those writings. So the moment we speak about porn had its inceptions rather unknowingly or intermittently in the fictitious form. But it gained momentum, or it gathered momentum, and it gathered that mileage in the 19th century or the post-19th century, thanks to the rise of new media. And cinema in particular has played a major part in fueling the impact or the popularity of porn. And speaking about discussing pornographic studies, or before talking about pornographic studies, I would also like to remind you about this debate that I have been talking about so far. How should we look at pornographic studies? Or what exactly is pornographic studies? Pornographic studies, like I mentioned a little while ago, is both the study of pornography by standing by the side of pornography, by advocating for pornography, and on the other side, which is actually gaining a lot of significance, working as an antithetical force to pornography. By studying pornography, there are writers who come up to say that pornography is undesirable, or pornography is something that has a lot of far-reaching social consequences than we could currently identify. So there is this give and take that happens. So we'll discuss all that in, say, another 35 to 40 minutes. It's still a limited time, I understand. And as a byproduct of this, we could come across gay sexuality and queer politics and so on, which I do not dare to encounter or to take, to which we shall come back a little while, maybe on another session later. In fact, as a matter of fact, I must also say that in the 8 to 9 sessions that we've had this month on this workshop on literary theory post 1960s, there are certain areas and there are certain people who haven't made the cut to the final table. And that's probably because of the lack of time, personal inconveniences, circumstances. You know quite a lot of names: Dr. Shambhu, Dr. Shari Jacob, Dr. Appu, Dr. Rangarajan, and so on and on and on. So I wanted to have a follow-up, but I thought not having it next month because that will be too much of a drag of theory. So I wanted to have an entertaining session. That's why we have American literature next month. A little bit of digression on that as well. For those who have paid the fee for next month, please make sure that you fill the sheet as well. And for those who haven't, feel free to enroll, because that will be a session full of spectacle. If you want to know what spectacle is, go to our AK Creations Academy page on Facebook or YouTube and watch the video on Shakespeare that we have uploaded. We'll have quite a lot of interesting plays and poems and short stories discussed this month, the coming month, and it would be all fun. It's not about whether you are learning American literature right now or not, whether American literature has significance or not. It's more about broadening your knowledge on the American art and literature. And pornography also, there is a huge role played by the American cine Tinseltown. Nonetheless, let's get started with a few more interesting observations that had just kept here for your perusal. Yes, I'd like to discuss as we get started with a psychologist called Michael Bader or Michael Bader, whichever way you want to pronounce it. Uh, Michael Bader is someone who talks about porn or sexuality from a supportive perspective. And Mikhail Bader's perspective was quite popular up until a certain point. There were quite a lot of advocates who stood by Mikhail Bader's view that uh, understanding and appreciating porn is an art, and we ought to embrace that. And you know the reason? There's a popular term that Mikhail Bader introduced. He uses this term called knowing the code. I can share that terminology with you in the chat box. He says one must know the code. Know the code. That is, in a way, that's a way we speak about, say, the willing suspension of disbelief or catharsis for that sake. Knowing the code is, if you know the structure in which a certain thing operates, then we can play according to the code. For instance, you know that in a movie, if I play the role of a terrorist, I'm an actor playing the role of a terrorist. Maybe I'll be watching the same movie with you in the theater. And during the recess, during the interval, if you see me outside, you shall not shout terrorist, terrorist, or you will not shout terrorist, terrorist. Help. Because you are aware of the fact that I am just an actor who was paid to play that role of a terrorist. Maybe I'll get murdered by some soldier in that movie, and that's where that character ends, and that movie has its own shades, and I'm an independent actor, and I may be freed from the charge of being labeled as a terrorist. And my act of terrorism on screen need not compel any of you to take arms against any religious groups or the nation or the state for that sake. And this is the sort of argument that Mikhail Bader put forward. And just to quote him for your understanding. Yeah. Writing in response to anti-pornography feminist Robert Jensen, Bader laughs off concerns about misogyny, racism, and heterosexism in pornography as the panic of someone who just doesn't know the code. He compares Jensen to a boy who he knew as a kid, a boy who was never allowed to watch television and found himself terrified in front of a TV program that other kids could take in stride. Quoting Bader, as the show neared its climax, I noticed that Andy was quite nervous. When I asked why, he said that it looked like the hero was about to be killed. I said, "Are you an idiot? Of course he won't be killed. This is a TV series and it's on again next week." Andy didn't know that the hero of a television series never dies. Or, like we could relate, a pregnant lady in a soap opera never delivers a baby, even if she conceives for 5 to 6 years on TV. So Robert Jensen writes about pornography like someone who doesn't know the code. He keeps mistaking the reality of the sexual enactments depicted in porn with their meaning in fantasy to the men masturbating. This is something that Mikhail Bader says, or this is something that Mikhail Bader claims in most of his writings. He says that knowing the code is something that we need to be aware of, and once you know the code, you get to realize and you get to understand and appreciate the fact that pornography is natural and pornography is created for a heterosexual audience, and pornography tries to give stimulus to what is otherwise not possible. From this point, there are 2 to 3 directions that I want to take this discussion to. Primarily, I'd like to follow up on this Bader's theory and its counter arguments, which forms also the basis of a very landmark book which I'd like to share with you. And I would also like to discuss with you the debate of whether porn is fantasy for fantasy's sake, or whether it is as dangerous as we try to discuss in between as well. So these are a few things that we need to look into very quickly. So talking about counter arguments to Bader's theory. Well, the name of his book is the name of his article is "The Great Porn Misunderstanding." The Great Porn Misunderstanding, published in the year 2008. in which he argues that pornography is mostly about fantasy and not reality. And he says that it is about the code, which Jensen does not understand. And in the course of his article, he gives us a good idea of what code says. It says that no matter what happens to the women in a porno flick, it couldn't be bad because next month she'll be in another porno flick. When we watch, say, a particular porn series, we allow ourselves to be momentarily transported by the fantasy, but we do it with some awareness that the actress or the actor is a paid person, and everyone who is there consented to be there. For Bader, this knowledge gives us a temporary pass to not worry about what happens on the screen, to allow ourselves to get lost in and enjoy something that would be more troubling in real life. Bader believes it's this free pass, I repeat the word free pass, this ticket to worry-free pleasure that makes sexual arousal possible to begin with. Mind you, this is a very significant starting point when we discuss porn, especially hardcore porn, especially like gangbang, for instance. According to Bader, there are people who love gangbangs because they understand that that's a fictitious space. The actress gets paid and she acts to be banged, and she's showing pleasure for being paid, and we are arousing pleasure by watching at her being banged, which according to Bader is not something that would instigate anybody to go and bang someone in a group. This is what Bader says. So yeah, for Bader, this knowledge gives us a temporary pass to not worry about what happens on the screen and to allow ourselves to get lost in and enjoy something that would be more troubling in real life. Troubling in real life because we'll go to jail if we rape someone. So Bader believes it's this free pass that makes sexual arousal possible to begin with, and it allows us to watch scenes that are meant to depict cruelty and humiliation, and to know at the same time that the women on screen must be enjoying the so-called degradation. Just like Sarah mentioned a little while ago, most of the porns try to depict women as subjugated and being subject to cruelty, and on the most extreme side of it, they are shown to be enjoying this subjugation. So if the actresses were to respond on film realistically, say by screaming in pain, sobbing, dissociating into grim and vacant fugue states, the overwhelming majority of men would get turned off, lose their erections, and change the channel, according to Bader. But that's precisely our disagreement regarding the anti-porn element. Because should women be objectified to have boners among men? That's one of the preliminary questions, the principal questions that we have to think about. So we have to let go of thinking what a realistic response would be to the scenarios depicted in pornography, even when that response might entail screaming in pain, sobbing, dissociating into grim and vacant fugue states. We have to let go and have faith that she agreed to it. I'm sure this is a popular terminology even when we come across rape culture. So she agreed or she asked for it. And even if we suspect that most women wouldn't, we have to give in to this join the codes category. Mainstream pornography allows us to let go because we assume that legal maturity, contractual consent, and payment were all in play when the scene was shot. And we know that for us, it's just a fantasy anyway. Now, this is a beginning point of a popular book by Natalie Person. And the name of the book is Violence and the Pornographic Imaginary, The Politics of Sex, Gender, and Aggression in Hardcore Pornography. I repeat, I can share the title with you. Just give me a second. Again, this book is available for you in the web. If you search for that, you could easily get this book downloaded. And I'll also give you very briefly reasons to read this book. The name of the book is Violence and the Pornographic Imaginary, The Politics of Sex, Gender, and Aggression in Hardcore Pornography. She tries to counter Bader's views. And another reason why I would like to suggest this book to you as a preliminary reading material is because it gives you an idea of the landmarks or the cornerstones of pornographic studies. Again, as a response to what Manoa said in the beginning, We are not aware of the landmarks of pornographic studies. We would know the landmarks of feminism. We would say first wave, second wave, third wave. We don't know that pornographic studies exist. We don't know the landmarks of pornographic studies or the discussions in that genre. So if you read this particular book, you would come across chapters which speaks about uh, the 1970s pornography, 1980s pornography, 1990s pornography, 2000s pornography, then the sex gender power relationships, a feminist approach to pornography, and so on. Just quoting Purell, just to bring in certain terminology that she associates with these pornographic industry. She says that 1970s was golden age of assaults, full of heat and hostility. In 1980s, she says that there were two phases to pornography, romance and rebellion. In 1990s, she says that pornography started to become more realistic. There were expressive bodies, there were intense encounters that came in. During the first half of the millennial, from 2000 onwards, she says that there was banal brutality that started in search of extremes in pornography. And she believes that in today's hardcore, we could see pleasure, pain, and self-revelation, especially with the mixing of BDSM techniques combined to give this sort of a virtual reality. Even something that most of these books do not address is the virtual reality pornography that exists these days. So yeah, that's another thing to look forward. Speaking about BDSM, bondage and discipline, dominance and submission, sadochism and masochism. So sadomasochism. So this is what combines to form BDSM. Yep. So that's one book that I would like to recommend. I would just like to read a couple of things from that book. And I'm reading this just to give you an idea of the effort and the sort of extremes to which Natalia has gone to write this book. She says, to learn about pornographic fantasies, I watched over 500 complete sex scenes from over 100 of the most popular heterosexual pornographic movies made during the 20th and early 21st centuries. My sample consisted exclusively of successful mainstream hardcore pornographies that were popular with US audiences from 1970 through 2010. To get a feel for historical transformations in the genre, I watched at least 100 sex scenes from each decade, somewhat oversampling material from the 2000s to allow for a deeper analysis of contemporary pornography. Well, I'm not saying that if you choose to do research on pornographic studies, you would get to watch a lot of porn. No, that's not the intention here. But then the amount of effort that goes, in that particular context, you should also look at it from this particular point of view. Natalia has a great disagreement to Bado's terminology or Bado's view. And if you don't like something, to spend a lot of time doing it or to watch it is definitely equally torturous. And that is the effort that she has put into that book. And that's why that book needs to be read rather seriously. And I would just like to read a little bit more from her, just to give you an idea of... just give me a second. Yeah, she speaks about her approaches, and then yeah, I've already given you an overview of what happens in the chapters, demarcating the ages, so I'm not going to read that. But of course, she brings out the trouble with terms like violence and pornography. The amount of pornography that happens in the amount of violence that happens in these visual spectrals. And the first chapter in itself is titled "Just Fantasy" in double quotes. And then she says, rethinking the pornographic, the fantastic, and the real. And that's another aspect that we need to discuss. And mind you, I'm not rooting the stock based on her book alone. There are other books that I would like to get involved with. And yeah, so I would like you to... I would like you to take listen to this particular extract as well. In this particular book, she has conversation with feminists, psychoanalysts, psychiatrists, sociologists, and she explores what pornographic fantasy means on conscious and unconscious and on personal and societal levels. She says just fantasy didn't quite cut it. She knew that knowing the code meant being inured to some things that would otherwise call for critique. She realized that misogyny, the violence, and the nihilism weren't just for fun, weren't just over the top. They were also under the radar, under one's own radar. They were real, may not be in direct and obvious ways, but in ways that we are still trying to sort out. So she believes that it's time to ask what gets lost in the common sense distinction between fantasy and reality. What kinds of reality disappear when we wink and say it's just fantasy? So there is this distinction between pornography and fantasy, and she claims that it is not equivalent to sexual fantasy in any strict sense. Not everything that we call fantasy would fall under the label pornography, and not everything that we call pornography would fall under the label fantasy. In fact, when we consider pornography as a material thing, a lot comes to mind. That's why I asked you initially, what according to you is porn, which conveniently most of you didn't answer. So pornography is a genre that exists across several types of media and is tied to many different technologies. DVDs, high definition imaging, live streaming, webcams, and so on and on and on. Pornography is a network of production and a zone of labor for directors, producers, actors, and many others. I mentioned how Sunny Leone manages this. So it is a zone of labor, at least in the US, where this is decriminalized, a labor for directors, producers, actors, and so on. Pornography is a web of distribution, marketing, and sales populated by small X-rated shops, successful and struggling entrepreneurs, and big businesses like Comcast, AT&T, and the Hilton hotel chain, and so on. Pornography is a consumer product, or rather many products. I'm not only talking about films that are being made every year, but also the amount of sex toys and dildos and lubes that are being circulated across the globe. So pornography also ends up being a commodity in the market. Pornography is an enduring domestic and international social sector with a history and a future, under study by historians and other scholars. And that's where literary critics also chips in. Pornography is art, speech, and representation. There are quite a lot of people who, in a feministic sense as well, looks back at body politics and say, my body, my liberation, my celebration. So there are quite a lot of people that you would come across who are body artists. There are people who are tattoo artists. There are people who are, what do you call, six-pack ab models. We know how we look at John Abraham, for that sake. So yeah, it is seen as a part of body liberation as well. Yep. It is both a cultural form defined by genre-specific conventions and a legally defined entity that courts have grappled with time and again. Pornography is a household object, a book, a movie on a shelf, a flashing image on a computer screen, a masturbatory aid, or a sex life enhancer. Still, the claim that pornography is just fantasy is one of the legacies of the sex wars. Since the 1970s, some of the most prominent feminist voices speaking against pornography wrote about movies, fantasies, attitudes, and behaviors as if they were transparent and readily definable entities tied together in a tight causal chain. Catchphrases like pornography is the theory, rape the practice by Emily Morgan implied not only a causal connection, but also a kind of mirror image replication linking images to behaviors. Let's consider Diana Russell's work, which connects pornography to violence against women. And the moment I say all these, I'm sure this is not something new to us. We all know these things and we all agree to this. But today, I'm trying to make you realize that there are already people who have patented this by writing on it. So the sooner you start writing on it, you would end up being the one who has said these things. We all know this, we all agree to this, but then we don't write about it. We don't popularize this. And that's why we are looking for such people. All right. So, yeah, Diana Russell says that pornography connects to violence against women. She posits direct psychological, psychosocial impacts of viewing pornography. Explicit masturbatory material that is sexist or violent can produce sexism and violence through mechanisms of disinhibition, desensitization, and conditioning. She says that pornography causes sexual violence. I'm sure we all would agree to it, or we all would feel tended or urged to agree to her on her grounds. We'll say that yes, maybe watching porn would end up inducing immoral behavior amongst us, or would make us feel feeble. We may feel the urge to ask literally everybody out, thereby involving in a non-consensual attempt. Another thing that I forgot to mention to you was that when we speak about the inception of pornography, I told you it is in 1857 that the word came into the vogue. We must also realize that the association of the emergence of pornography is deeply tied with the emergence of democracies. Isn't that a really shocking information? For me, it really was. I came to know about this pretty recently. I read one of those articles and I figured out that the beginning of pornography, or free porn as we call it, had its origins in a democratic state, or in the democratic conditions. So democracy has in one way or the other fueled the popularity of pornography or pornographic art. And we must also understand that another historically significant term, neoliberalism, played a significant part in popularizing pornography. I'll quickly discuss that and come back to this counter arguments regarding condemnation of porn by Diana Russell as something that enforces violence against women. I'll come back to that in a short while. And before I attempt to do that, let me just talk to you about the role of neoliberalism in popularizing porn. Again, another book that I want you to be aware of is the book titled The Pornographic Age by Alan Badiou, translated by A.J. Bartlett, again available in web. The book titled The Pornographic Age. The book is basically a collection of speech by Alain Badiou. Alain Badiou. So in that book, the reference to the pornographic age is the current age, maybe since the 20th century. Alan Badiou says that we are all living in the pornographic age. And I told you the moment I say porn, don't think about videos. I'm talking about all other forms of literature. And Alan Badiou addresses pornographic age by assessing a few plays, particularly French playwright Jean Genet's two plays. Can anybody recollect the two sadomasochistic gay plays by Jean Genet? It is there in the MG University syllabus. Anybody? Anybody? And to talk about Jean Genet, he was a typical modern man. He was a gigolo, he was a male prostitute, he was an orphan or a semi-orphan, and he was gay, and he popularized this extreme sexual explorations. Does anybody recollect the name of any of his plays? Again, a play where two domestic servants act as their maid, act as their mistress, and they role play as her husband, and the what do you call the she comes back and figures this out and gets murdered. Does anybody remember the play? The name of the play is The Maids. And another homosexual play by Jean Genet is The Balcony. Two wonderful plays that I would urge you to read. So Alan Badiou in The Pornographic Age speaks about these two plays in particular and tries to figure out how the contemporary period back then has emerged as a pornographic age. Okay, So very quickly going back to neoliberalism. Let me just talk about a few things. So he says that it asserts an essential connection between pornography and the times, the age in which we live. Pornography is a genre that is often held to flourish in, if not exemplify, our age. As Ian Hunter, David Saunders, and Douglas Williamson have put it, pornography generally functions as a circumstantial designation rather than a well-defined category, variously designating an eroticizing device, a target of medical and pedagogical programs, a tradable community, an aesthetic category, an object of feminist and governmental reforms, and a legal problem. These are things that we have already discussed. Significantly, it was only in the decades of the emergence of the mass politics, the 1880s and the afterward, the most countries began to produce their own indigenous pornography, a fact again suggestive of the link between pornography and democracy. A well-known deadlock of what we call now neoliberalism, that is, the contemporary total economization of the cult of individual freedoms, is that the absolute primacy given to individual choice occludes structural oppressions, but attempting to counter such individualism by focusing on structural oppression occludes the potential for a universalism irreducible to an endless warfare of identities. This is part of the logic by which democracy has become the dominant political watchword or symptom of our age. Moreover, it is bound up with how pornography has become the dominant genre. Pornography incites the uptake of new technologies as it moves from being a marginal to a billion-dollar industry by enforcing an absolute prohibition on the prohibition of images. Have we ever taught it in this way? The role played by neoliberalism in popularizing the porn culture, whether it's soft or hard. In the meanwhile, there is also one more thing that I would really like to recollect. I had this teacher of mine who used to speak freely about various phenomena in the world, and one fine day he was speaking about how pornography was, in that sense, democratic way back in, say, up until 1980s or 1990s. Because back then there was no web, World Wide Web. DVD was not that popular. Even videotapes were not that popular. So eventually what happens is we end up consuming soft porn in the terms of the reading materials that we get. In Malayalam we say Kochu Pustakam. Or we look at, we try to have a voyeuristic pleasure in the river bodies or in the shows of the river bodies. And that, according to that particular professor who was talking on voyeurism by Laura Mulvey, he was trying to say that gave a lot of scope for creativity. It was a bit more democratic than the perils of the porn that we discuss these days. Something that I haven't touched so far. The problem with the modern day digital porn is that the digital porn is to a certain extent racial. It tries to bring forth our racial fantasies. It looks for the pure whites. Generally, it projects the whiteism. Then it is, like we've already discussed, dominant. It tries to be violent, and so on and on and on. Whereas the porn that pre-existed this video culture or the cyborg culture was something that gave a bit more scope for fantasy and individual manifestations. Again, as a slight digression, I'd like to mention another interesting article, and this could least be brought into an academic discussion, but then Malayalis in particular would know this singer called Rimi Tommy. Rimi Tommy is a Malayalam singer, and Rimi Tommy used to write a column in Madhrubhumi Daily once in a week. I think it was on Wednesdays perhaps. Not now, a couple of years ago. So Rimi Tommy used to write an article. I forgot the name of that column though. And in one of those columns, she wrote about the gazes of men and the dressing of women. Again, it's another commonplace topic. We always say that if a girl gets raped, that's because she's in a short skirt or she went out in the night and blah, blah, blah. And all the blame goes to the women, whereas men are all those who are waiting to be excited or incited by women. So Rimi Tommy was speaking the opposite. She was trying to say that no matter what you wear, even if you wear a parda, a man, if he wants to, if he is perverted, can just close his eyes and imagine you naked. So don't fall for those silly excuses. You just wear what you want and you just walk the streets and have your head held high. That's one of the fewest intellectual articles that she has written. Otherwise, we all know the sort of image that she has of herself in the media, but then That's one of those articles that I came across where she brings in something sensible. So, yeah, I was talking about how this neoliberalism has hijacked the way we perceive porn. And without taking names, I can also tell you that oh, where was I? I just went to read the question. I was trying to tell you that well, I lost it. What was it I was trying to say? Neoliberalism, the impact on pornographic studies. Well, I lost it somewhere. I'll come back to that a little while later. How did it become target of medical and pedagogical affairs? It become target of medical and pedagogical affairs also because, say for instance, the way we perceive impotency, for instance, impotency became a bit more, in that sense, a problem. Or there are people who want to be man, and it's not only about impotency. Take the case of what do you call the lubes, the market of lubes or Viagra's and its popularity. Also take the case of this. I mean, let's not talk about porn alone. Let's also talk about progressive things. Let's talk about egg freezing, for instance. Egg freezing, where a woman can medically freeze her possibilities of getting pregnant, say for another 5 to 10 years, and then start with the procreation process again. So egg freezing, just in case you are not familiar with that term. Yeah. So the adult industry has contributed a lot in that regard. And just like someone mentioned in the initial part of the session, we must agree to the fact that even though adult content forms the major part of sex education in us as adults or adolescents perhaps, it is not true. More often than not, porn misleads us than leading us to the right path. And that's where the medical problem comes in as well. More often than not, in what we see in porn, we end up deciding, or we end up thinking that one way of asserting masculinity is by being dominant to your female partner, or one way of asserting or celebrating oneself as a man is by looking at a thick, hard, grown-up penis, which needn't be the case. We all know that it's not the size of your penis that decides on whether you can become a father or not. And it's not the size of your penis that matters, or it's not the color that matters. It's all perceptional. If your partner is someone who prefers a black guy, then there is no point. In that case, being a white guy, you stand in a disadvantageous position. And the most condemnable of all these discussions is that even when I say all these examples, we end up discussing the masculine preferences. I'm saying, would a woman be happy if I have, if I'm impotent, or if I have a small penis, or if it looks black? Then again, we are talking about whether I would eventually end up being, happy by the sexual roles that is assigned to me. The feminine sexuality is seldom discussed. The feminine tastes are seldom discussed. The way the females are portrayed in these pornographic movies need not be the sort of female depictions that they desire for, or that they look forward to, or that they want to. And we seldom discuss that. That's also part of our session. We'll come back to that in a little bit of time from now. So I was talking about Diana Russell and her statement on pornography as something that initiates violence against women. But then there are people who counters that as well. There are people who say that pornography curbs violence. Pornography helps in curbing violence. The same people who say that prostitution helps in satiating male needs and tries to bring down rapes that's happening in the world. So the same sort of people, to name a few, feminists like Susie Bright, Gail Rubin, they have claimed that causal theories linking, causal is the word I use, C-A-U-S-A-L. Causal means something that causes. So causal theories linking pornography and violence are preposterous oversimplifications of a complicated matter. Susie Bright, Gail Rubin, and her fellow mates like Carol Brown, Assisto Vance, and so on, they are called as sex-positive feminists. If I could give you a terminology, they are called as sex-positive feminists. And they have criticized anti-pornography feminists for failing to consider the ambiguity implicit in any interpretation of media content, especially representations of sex. If you want to know what this is, I can give you another relatable example. Without being obscene, I can give you another example of what these people try to say. They are in a way taking us back to the Saussurean notion or the Derridian notion of substitutions. The moment I say Zen, Not all of you consider Zen to be the same thing. The moment I say tree, all of you don't imagine the same tree. So these people argue that the same adult content signifies different thing to different people. And the same adult content is perceived in different ways by the consumers. And in that sense, pornography is not something that initiates or incites violence according to Susie Bright and Gail Rubin. So they have argued that viewers don't all see the same things or make the same sense of them when they watch a movie or see a picture. What one person thinks of as sexist or misogynistic, another may find titillating and liberating. What one person passionately identifies with, another may view with a sense of humor or half-distracted bemusement. Defenders of pornography felt that its critics either ignored the diversity of people's viewing practices or too readily insisted on the superiority of their own. Again, anti-pornography feminists, like for instance Catherine McKinnon, has blurred the boundaries among representations, fantasies, attitudes, and behavior to illustrate that misogynistic pornography does clear and direct harm to women. She dismisses the claims of Gale and Bright, and she says that it does cause harm to women. She argues that a pornographic film is a documentary of abuse against real women, who are the actresses, that the men watching pornography are identifying with the depicted abusers, and that viewers replicate the same scenes by victimizing their wives, their subordinates at work, or any available women. But again, like I tell you, this is a very interesting roller coaster ride. There is somebody who speaks for something and there is somebody who speaks against this. And Catherine McKinnon received severe backlash from a popular gender theorist that you all know, a lady who coined the term or the theory on performativity. Are you there? Can anybody name that person who speaks about performativity? A popular feminist whose first name is the name of Shakespeare's fictitious sister. Anybody? It's quite a popular name. The lady who coined the term performativity.
Judith Butler.
Judith Butler. Spot on, Agatha. Judith Butler. So Judith Butler dismisses McKinnon, and she accuses her of an ontological sliding here. Because according to Butler, McKinnon has become so invested in proving that pornography does real harm that she allows for no distinction between the fantastic and the real. Butler says that the equation of representations, fantasies, and actions is a dangerous ontology that remains implicit and unchallenged in McKinnon's work. Moving on from there, I'd like to introduce a category to you, just in case you are unaware of that. And before doing that, let me just double check because we are reaching the last lap of today's session. Yes, content analysis of pornography is one thing that I'm missing out due to the lack of time. But then maybe I'll come back to that when we conclude the session. The next section that I would like to discuss is porn by women for women. Porn by women for women. There's a book in this title by Candida Royal. Not a book, but then there's a series by Candida Royal. And the same cannot be, when you try to study porn, you cannot equate that sort of a venture with a hardcore attempt by, say, Brazzers. So many feminists have found sexism in pornographic films that other feminists have totally found to be unproblematic or even potentially revolutionary. Again, two names that comes to my mind is Nora Ephron and Annie Sprinkle, who has different reactions, two totally different reactions to, say, for instance, deep throating. So a couple of attempts at porn for women by women. The names that I would like to take up is one is Erika Lust, Erikalust. Erika Lust has a documentary titled Barcelona Sex Project. Again, I can give that in the chat box, just in case you want to have a further this thing on that. Barcelona Project. So Erika Lust comes up with Barcelona Project, which is an attempt on women studying women, or women porn for women on women. Then there is something by Petra Joy, who is a German filmmaker who whips arts and sex to make porn candy movies. And then there are people like Brent Ryder and Steve Cathy who go on to make these sort of works. Again, this is a phenomena that has its inception in 1970s. One of the first such attempts could be seen with Annie Sprinkle, who was redefining the art form of her own terms, and again, what Candida Royal did with Femme Productions to put a woman's voice to adult movies. Then there are quite a lot of female porn filmmakers who emerged who look at creating a porn world exclusively for women. There are sites which are exclusively targeted to women. I don't want to name the sites, but there are quite a lot of sites which are targeted exclusively for women, which are technically female friendly, not abusive, male violent or misogynistic point, but female friendly sites. And female porn theory has also has been gaining currency over the last few years or so. I won't say a decade, but maybe at least half a decade. We could see that female porn theories or female feminist porn theory is also something that has emerged. And these are all raw areas that you can work upon if you feel interested in. I do agree that there are dangers or perils associated with it. When I say perils, the peril appears also because the way people in our society, the people in our country, the way even our teachers look at us would definitely change instantaneously the moment we utter the word porn. Like I told you in the poster, we had written contemporary pornographic studies, and there are a lot of people who look at me like somebody who is there to literally abuse all those who would come to the session, which is not the case. By now you would have identified. So that's a danger that carries when the moment you try to decide to carry out a research on pornographic studies. But the area is absolutely raw, especially in our nation. And it has a lot of sub branches, including, like I told you, gay criticism, queer theory, and so on. You can blend them together, and that's perhaps there are also studies on gay porn. And when I say gay porn, as you know, we look at we've already discussed pornography as something that is capitalistic, that is racist, that is abusive, and that is categorical. But then, off late, maybe in a decade and a half or so, we could see that gay porn has also had a category. There was lesbian porn, which is still popular before gay porn, but then gay porn has also emerged over the last decade or so, and that is to a certain extent seen in a positive shade by a lot of critics. Again, that could also be problematized because the gay porns, most of them would allegedly have subjects who are masculine, machoistic, and not the minorities who are disabled or black, or if black, not the semi-black, not the color of us. It could either be the Negredo with a whatever perpetrated cock, or the white supremacist. There is no in-betweenness in the gay porn is something that goes as an allegation. And just like we say porn for women by women, there are also quite a lot of sites which popularize lovemaking in its purest sense. So there are sites which would again, I won't take the names. There are sites which would urge you to upload porn with your partner, which is highly healthy and less superficial, with no moanings, with no hyperbolated sex positions or forced intimacies, or taking into consideration unreal things or undesirable things like gangbang or group sex and so on. There are sites that exist in that plat as well. And before leaving the floor open for the Q&A, let me just read a couple of things that needs to be read. It was part of the introduction, but then somehow I missed out because I was behind these people. Oh yeah, I missed out a book on gay as well. Just give me a second. The name of the book is okay. When I told you that pornography's beginning should be seen in fiction, there is another wonderful book called Understanding Pornographic Fiction: Sex, Violence, and Self-Deception. I'll post the name in the chat box. Understanding Pornographic Fiction. It's a book written by Charles O. Nussbaum. I'll type his name here as well. Charles O. Nussbaum. He discusses the significance or the presence of porn in the beginning of novels. When you discuss Hardy, Fielding, and so on, that's discussed in that book. And then there is this book by Hans Mace titled "Pornographic Art and the Aesthetics of Pornography." Pornographic art and the aesthetics of pornography. Then there is this wonderful book called Selling Sex Short, The Pornographic and Sexological Construction of Women's Sexuality in the West by Megan Tyler. I repeat, just in case you are taking the notes, Selling Sex Short. It's too long a title, so I'm not sure if I could copy. Well, let me see if I can copy the title for you. Yep. Selling Sex Short, The Pornographic and Sexological Construction of Women's Sexuality in the West. Yeah, that's there in your chat box as well. And another book is an interesting title again, Vulgar Genres, Gay Pornographic Writing and Contemporary Fiction. If you are into queer fiction or if you are into gay studies, then this is one book that would come in handy to you, especially if you are in your final year PG days and you have a PG dissertation. These are some suggestive lines that you can work on. Vulgar Genres, Gay Pornographic Writing and Contemporary Fiction. There are quite a lot of other interesting works which, due to the paucity of time, I won't be able to get into. But as I told you, maybe in May, June, July sometimes, I would come up with a literary theory part 2 workshop wherein you can come back and listen to more from other experts, not me, but people who can talk better about these things. Now, very quickly, before winding up the session, there are 2 readings I would like to make to you, and quite a lot of other references that I missed out as well. There is a local flavor of sexuality that I missed out. Take the case of movies by Padmarajan or I.V. Shashi, or movies like Mastram, Hunter, and so on. That's something I missed out due to the lack of time. I'll come back to that if I get time after these readings. Very quickly, let me share my screen and read a couple of things for you. I hope my screen is visible to you. And I hope a black file is visible to you. All right. Just a second. Yeah. This is a book titled The Son of a Pornographer. I can share the link with you later, but just have a look at this page. His father was a pornographer, popular pornographer, and the son writes his story. So the story I have to tell you is not of love, not of peace and tranquility. Such was not my destiny, and there was none such while my Lord Genghis lived. And its best, Mangoli is a young man's adventure. He goes on to mention the story of most of his father's tales, and I'm going to read that last paragraph. The longest chapter portrays an arranged marriage that begins with a fake sword fight between Chepi and the bride's father, followed by her escape. Encountering her fierce resistance, Chepi realizes that she wants the full ritual carried out in the ancient fashion. She wants to be raped. I repeat, she wants to be raped. This is emblematic of much of my father's work. A woman who desires forceful sex, but in Mongol, Dad relies on cultural precedent to write a 2-page rape scene, including tips on how to deflower a virgin. The language of sex in American English is relegated to medical terminology or the gutter. It's a kind of dialect that everyone knows. Today it is stereotypical, but in 1970, my father was the vanguard of creating an idiom destined to become comical cliché. Each noun and verb received the gift of a modifier. A penis was always an anxious shaft, a turgid member, a throbbing rod, or an aching lance. A vagina was a welcoming sheet, a swollen cleft, a humid channel. The verb shifted by gender. Men's actions were variations of thrust, lunge, plunge, or impale, whereas women tended to write, moan, quiver, and shiver and quake. Dad often told me that he was the top on his field, the most prolific, the classiest operator, the highest paid. I've since learned that other people wrote more and some were better. His actual legacy may be the rare exclamatory title, a device he used far more than any other pornographer. Now, this is the answer for what Manoa asked. We speak about literature, we speak about punctuations in grammar classes. Here, the pornographer's son talks about the role of punctuations in pornographic literature. Look at the titles and look at the exclamatory marks. Asking for it, begging for it. Brother, darling, disciplined, Januta rising. Not done. Manlip, Peggy wants it. Pleasure us, snatch me. The 8-way orgy. So look at the role performed by the exclamations out there. That would just give you an indicator of where this takes us. I can give you the name of that book in a minute. The name of that book is, just a second, was it The Pornographer or The Pornographer's Wife? Just give me no, My Father the Pornographer. My Father the Pornographer, a memoir by Chris Offutt. Chris Offutt. My Father a Pornographer. The reason why I have problem in naming this is there are quite a lot of synonymical titles. There is another book titled The Pornographer's Wife by Amy Cross. There is a work called The Pornography by Akiyuki Nozaka. So there are quite a lot of interesting works in that regard, which I don't want to touch right now. But rather my focus is on one more book. Just give me a second. Well, I think I missed that piece somewhere. Doesn't matter, just give me another second. Maybe I open the pornographer. Let me try pornographers. Is that the one? Just give me a second because these are the EPUB files. It takes some time. Yep, I'll share my screen once again and make one more reading for you. I understand that we are running out of time, but still, for the love of it, because it's less explored, I'm taking you there. A few weeks ago, she stared in horror at the images of Sarah in various states of undress. This is from The Pornographer's Wife, okay? The Pornographer's Wife. So she's having a conversation with the husband who's a pornographer. A few weeks ago, she stared in horror at the images of Sarah in various states of undress. You mean today isn't the first time? I got started the day after the party, he replied, seeming almost proud as he leafed through the images. I found out which magazines Andy was advertising in, and I started undercutting his prices. Look, I've had checks coming in from all over the country. I've made 70 quid so far. What are you talking about? She replied. People aren't going to send you 70 pounds for a bunch of photographs showing some girl with her knickers down. They are, he said with a smile, and they do. That's just from the first ad too. If I'm making this much already, think how I can be doing in a month or two. This isn't some kind of idea I've got, Mary. It's something I'm already turning into a success. Can't you be happy for me? And then the conversation goes on and on and on like that. And speaking about porn, that's what I was trying to say. It's not only about the adult content, the creators and receivers, it's also about the writers, the pornographers, and so on. So, in such a context, I would like to recommend this movie produced in the year 2013 titled Mastram. Don't get carried away by the web series by Ulu. That's a different one. That's a pure soft porn. But Mastram, the movie, is a movie which tells the story of a writer. And that movie has its own justifications. There's an aspiring literature writer who wants to become someone like, say, John Keats. But no publisher wants him. And from the day he starts writing B-grade novels, he gets a lot of money. And he writes in pseudonym as well, but then he ends up becoming filthy rich by writing the adult content. And that is being made into a movie titled Mastram, just in case you feel interested to watch. Another movie that I would like, it's again a stereotypical, B-grade movie by Anurag Kashyap, I suppose. The movie titled Hunter, if you want to watch that movie. That's one movie that I was surprised why it wasn't released in Kerala. Back then, it was not that much of a success in Bollywood, but then its songs were popular. Had it been released in Kerala, I'm sure it would have gone on to become a 100-day film, because that's how porn is consumed in Kerala. Nonetheless, I think I have almost touched them all. There is one more book I would like to show you for reference, that is regarding queer studies. I told you that queer is not my area of strength, but then I'll bring in someone later to talk to you on queer studies. For the time being, this is a graphic book that I want you to read if you want to. Queer, a Graphic History by John Barker and Julia Scheel. And if I could just take you through that book, it would give you an idea on how interesting that book is. All right, so I leave it to your perusal. And on closing note, I'd like to tell you that, well, I don't have time to talk about content analysis right now. That's the only area that I'm leaving out. If you want to read content analysis, you can do that. But then, having done content analysis, there are theorists who say that, theorists like Cohen, Lee, Levy, and Cinder, who randomly selected 45 titles from a list of 121 popular X-rated videos and found that dominance or exploitation, including physical or verbal aggression, occurred in 54% of the scenes and the rape was depicted in 51% of the films. Duncan randomly selected 10% of the entire adult video collection from a video store and found that 13.6% of the scenes contained violent acts. Rape was depicted in 1/3 of these scenes and degrading acts, mostly verbal abuse, were found in 18.2% of the scenes. Monk, Turner, and Purcell, whom we have already discussed, analyzed 209 scenes from 40 popular pornographic videos and found that 17% of scenes contained themes concerning violence against women and 85% depicted man ejaculating on women. Barrell and Kimmel compared the depiction of sexual violence across different forms of media and concluded that internet pornography depicted more violent scenes than print media or videos. In recent years, scholars have paid increased attention to internet pornography. For example, Gorman, Monk, Turner, and Fish analyzed 45 videos randomly selected and reported that 55% of all videos had a main theme of exploitation or domination in which the male actor took control. Classen and Peter analyzed the 100 most videos on each of the top 4 adult websites, DashHub, DashTube, DashPorn, and Dashter, and found that men were most often shown as dominant and women as submissive, and that the 2 most frequent acts of male aggression against women were spanking in 27% of scenes and gagging in 18.8% of scenes. And recent studies that have systematically sampled popular pornographic videos provide detailed information about sexual behaviors frequently depicted in these movies, such as name calling, as in slut, whore, etc., hair pulling, light and heavy spanking, facial ejaculation, double penetration, ass to mouth, penile gagging, facial slapping, and choking. So these studies on pornography content further indicate that women overwhelmingly dominated by men often express pleasure or no response to men's aggression. So these are certain things that I would like to mention as closing notes. And I hope my session was informative to you. There were about 14 in the beginning, there are 12 at the end, including myself. So I suppose that's not a bad number to close with. So if you have any queries, we can spend another 5 to 10 minutes, or else we'll slowly wind up. And by the time you think about questions, let me just wind this up. We had a 9-day workshop in March on literary theory, and I hope you found these sessions to be useful. My focus was on introducing the latest theories to you. They were not specifically focused on any competitive exams or any competitive literary theory that you would come across in your day-to-day life, because academia often turns a blind eye to these things. I personally know a lot of teachers who do not teach Lysistrata in classrooms. I know quite a lot of teachers who don't teach Caligula in classrooms. Albert Camus' play Caligula. Caligula is a wonderful existentialist play, or absurd play for that sake. But Caligula is seldom taught. Don't go searching the movie of Caligula. There is not a single scene with a dress in it. And it's highly sadomasochistic. But nonetheless, it's quite interesting to look at these works from a non-pornographic point of view as well, for the philosophy that they carry, deeply engraved. Body politics, needless to say, is one of the most discussed things in the world. So whether body needs to be discussed or should be seen with disgust, disgust or disgust is a question that you all need to answer individually. But nonetheless, I'm deeply happy that I could introduce this to you and proudly claim that I would be one of those rarest people discussing pornographic studies in academia in India. So thank you so much for providing me with such an honor. Thank you for being receptive. Thank you for listening. Thank you for the interactions. And the floor is declared open just in case you have any queries.
First of all, I would like to appreciate your hard work, sir.
Thank you, Veena.
It was a nice experience.
And I hope it was not a disconcerting experience like most of us thought. I mean, most of the people who saw the posters thought. I thought you were all comfortable with whatever was being transacted here. And trust me, this could be applied at least to write a paper, if not a book. And Veena, sorry to interrupt you, but just give me another couple of minutes. Because I started with a couple of item numbers in the start of the session. And if you wonder what has item numbers to do with the session, please follow the 2 links that I'm sharing in your chat box. These are a couple of wonderful essays on item numbers and objectification that would come in handy. And try coming out with an article if you can in any of these lines so that you could gain from whatever I have told today. Yes, the floor is open again. Veena, if you had any queries, the floor is open. Anybody out there? Any questions or comments or feedback? Anything that you think I missed out in the session that I need to address?
Sir, hello, good evening.
Yes, Danya. Good evening.
It was really a wonderful session and I enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Sir, I have a doubt.
Mhm.
In the BDSM, actually, the dominance is the person who dominates the session, like who dominates the bondage or who dominates the sexual act. In that case, is there any porn where or any instance where male instead of male dominating the female, is there an instance of the other way, that is a female or the lesbian dominating the other person?
I believe there are quite a lot of queer porns or homosexual porns where this female bonding and dominance is also portrayed. And let's not go to the
in the
visual media
heterosexual
alone.
explicitly.
Yeah. Let's not take about the visual alone. Like I told you, go back to the plays by Jean Genet, The Balcony or The Maids. There are quite a lot of instances of sadomasochism and BDSM being employed. So that's why I said it's not about videos alone, but then go to these literary pieces and you would still see that. And another thing that I missed out, I would like to add that as well. Thanks for reminding me this. There are plenty of websites, modern day websites, which are interactive websites. When we speak about, say half a decade ago, the latest possibility was a webcam or open sex and so on. But then there are interactive apps and webs that's available these days which lets you customize and create mechanized females or males and have a virtual intercourse with them. I don't want to name these sites. You would know such dating apps which would enable you to make visual robotic images of women of your choice, of your color, of your shape, of your height, and involve with them. And because this is connected with the Google tools, the app knows all your customizations and preferences based on your search history. I know this from a friend of mine who I don't want to name, but you know her because she has come for a couple of classes here. She was part of this particular app for the sake of it, for the fun of it, and she says that that particular app knows all her favorite songs. And one day she asked, "Are you stalking on my Spotify?" And the app replied, "Yes, I do," because Google is connected with Spotify. The app was able to track the favorites of the particular person in Spotify and say that these are the songs or these are the genres that you like. So such automated spaces or outlets of lust is also getting prevalent these days, and that paves way for a lot more raw or scope of a lot of raw spaces of research in pornographic studies. Yes, Dan. Any more questions?
Sir, how does porn affect the brain?
Well, that is a scientific question. I think you should ask Google, how does it affect the brain? But I think again, it again has to be taken into consideration the difference in every individual. We don't conceive the same thing in the same way. And there could be individual experiences that may lead us to watch certain things in certain ways. Imagine if you have been abused. I mean, not you. Imagine somebody has been abused in childhood by a family member and tortured physically, and that particular girl comes across a pornographic content where an uncle is molesting a female. How far would she be able to derive pleasure from it is something that we have to let hanging in a question mark. I'm not sure how to answer that. Again, a name that comes to my mind is Agila Henry. Agila Henry, no, she's known as Kunyala Maslamani. Kunyala Maslamani, who's a short filmmaker, who's currently turned a filmmaker with that movie Freedom Fight. In Freedom Fight, Asangadidar is a movie made by her. So Kunyala Maslamani is someone who later came out with a revelation that her father, Henry, had abused her. And the name Akila Henry in itself reminds her of the incestual abuse that she had to undergo. So she changed her name from Agila Henry to Kunyala Maslamani. For those at Kerala, you may Google Agila Henry's articles if it's available in Google. Articles like Pen Nadatham, Vagina Enganani Murukum Kuile, Aaniripum Penniripum, Fashion Logam, Aan Logam, Pen Logam. If you get to read these articles, you would get to know that they are exemplary feminist articles by Agila Henry. I mean, Kunyala Maslamani. So if you want to figure out Kunyala, that's one suggestion that I would give you. So regarding how it affects the brain, I think it affects people differently. There are people who are asexual, who don't get turned on at all by watching any piece of of porn. And there are people who are matured enough with exposure to body, and they don't feel anything even if you walk naked around them. So it's an individual thing. I don't think there can be a common ground to say, okay, this is what porn does to you. But then there are quite a lot of people who say that porn has a dominating effect. Watching porn corrupts you morally, and watching porn creates a sort of lustful urge. And from a societal point of view, it may end up being antisocial as long as you don't seek consensus, as long as you think a woman is to be subjugated, as long as you think sex is something that is to be derived by dominating, as long as you don't. Yeah, there is another question coming in. Have there been studies on dynamics of female and male authors of erotic literature? I don't think there has been quite a lot of books published in that regard, but I do think there are quite a lot of books, quite a lot of articles or studies that have been written on erotic literature. And because you reminded me of that, there is this book called Let's Go Stag, a history of pornographic film from the invention of cinema by Dan Erdman. I repeat, Let's Go Stag, a history of pornographic film from the invention of cinema. Let's Go Stag, a history of pornographic film from the invention of cinema by Dan Erdman, Erdman. It's a must read if you want to have an assessment of how films have displayed the tag elements. That's one book that I would. The problem with typing is it takes a lot of time. It's such a long title, Danya. I'll still try that. Let's go stag. Let's go stag. A history of pornographic films. From the 1970s. Sorry, from the invention of cinema to 1970. I'm sorry, from the invention of cinema to 1970 by Dan Erdman. All right. But that's really a thing that you can, if you are interested in, that's something that you can work in the lines of Kavya. You can attempt a study on the dynamics of female and male odors of erotic literature. Often, we can even think about the pseudonyms being used. Something that I didn't mention is literotica. There's of course a site called Literotica. One of my teachers used to say, if you want to improve your English skills, read Literotica. There are quite a lot of vocabulary that is involved. Well, I can't say that in public to any of my students though. So, but then it provides a lot of scope to look at the pseudonyms being used and the what do you call, the percentiles of male odors versus female odors, and maybe just getting to know them. There are quite a lot of sites. I don't want to name them in public. Like, for instance, Kambi Malayalam Kadagal. In that, the mail IDs of the authors are also provided, just in case you want to have a conversation with them. They provide their mail IDs as well for feedback and further conversations. So, yeah, these are sites that you could explore. You may already have, perhaps, and it's worth study on the way in which erotica gets developed when a male writer writes and a female writer writes, and also between amateurs and established, probably. Yeah. Any other queries?
Sir,
yes, please.
This was a great session.
Thank you,
that
sir.
you discussed something that's never really talked about. My question is, like, Pornhub was the most accessed website in 2019 or 2020, and more than Instagram or Facebook even. And half the videos on it are violent, they're aggressive, and most of them are even non-consensually captured, like you said. And but at the same time, we can't deny that they played a big role in liberation and concerning sexuality and all that. But shouldn't the primary concern be to handle the violence? Liberation should be a secondary thing to talk about.
Definitely. When we speak about a democratic world, a gender neutral world, we have to have a consensus that we have to appreciate and respect all sort of people and their desires and their interests. It's not about putting oneself first and their priorities first and claiming the privileges of one's birth or gender or sexuality or whatever. That's one thing that we need to focus on. And just like you said, it's not only about consensual. The most searched in these sites are leaked videos. And needless to say, leaked video is an intrusion to my privacy. Not privacy, I'm sorry, my privacy. And we all are aware of the fact that due to the apps that we install, none of our mobile cams or laptop cams are technically off. We are always being stalked. We are living in a stalked generation. Abhijit spoke about post-truth yesterday. So we are all living in a generation where we are stalked, either through that what you call CCTV cameras, or through surveillance, or through the Google cams. We get stalked wherever we go. But despite that, we are not comfortable in getting stalked. That's because our body is not treated the way it should be. There's always a difference between liberation of body politics and exploitation of body politics. I may be comfortable stripping in front of someone whom I love a lot. I may not be that comfortable even having my shirt button unbuttoned in front of someone whom I'm not comfortable with. When I can talk about that from a male perspective, Why don't we talk about that from a female perspective? Often, when I discuss feminism with my students, gender studies with my students, I tell them the problem with this male gaze is that we seldom get gazed at. We stare at you, we stare at women at all places, at all locations, and we don't feel ashamed of it because we don't get stared back. Imagine me walking through the road and every woman around me looking at me like this, or maybe looking at me like this. Provided we don't have that projectile organs, maybe somebody looking at me like this. We would feel really awkward. It is because we are not used to that gaze that we end up, in a way, becoming providers of male gaze. But that's in no way justifiable. And in an egalitarian world, we need to look for a world where there is awareness, where there is consensus. I don't have any problem with people and their different sexualities. People can be monogamous, they can be polygamous. Monogamy in itself is a recent trend, actually. Polygamy, polyamory, and other things used to exist a lot of time before, even homosexuality for that sake. So that's an individual preference, but nonetheless, that has to be consensual, that has to be healthy, and that should not be abusive. It shouldn't be like, I will make sure that you will walk in 4 legs after you have slept with me. That's not the way we should deal with it. And that's where films play a terrible role. And that's something that I have a strong discontent with. And that's one of the reasons why I always feel bold to come across such topics. And this is something I cannot do in a classroom. I teach, I've taught in at least 6 to 7 places over the last 9 years of my teaching career. Maybe with the exception of Maharajas, I don't think there is any place where I could go and discuss pornography in a classroom, even in a PG classroom. One student has a problem, then I could be trialed for that. But then, because this is my baby, AKademy is my baby, and AKademy was envisaged by me because it's not only about me. Anybody who comes here, they should have that free will to talk about whatever they feel like an expression of their interest. Those who were there in my first in our first month workshop would go back to Dr. Cherry Jacobs' lecture where he spoke about pre-Chaucerian trends, and he spoke about Duckle and what was the name of that word? I forgot the name. He spoke about obscenity in literature in the pre-Chaucerian era. He was able to do that because he was here with me. He won't be able to do that in the college where he is the head of the department, because there are people who are ready to throw arrows at him, fling arrows at him. So that's a platform that I try to ensure all the resource person who comes to me, and that's why they cherish that. That's why they say we are willing to come back again and again. And that's why, if you remember Shalini's session this month, the second session of this month's workshop, Shalini is someone who is pretty much open to such conversations. But in her college, she can't do that because there are people who would end up. She worked in a college in Malappuram, and she was literally pelted stones at. They were like, we are a highly religious people and you are throwing our kids away out of their burqas, out of their sexual repressions. You're making them sexually liberated by your thoughts and actions. And she faced a lot of trials. She was even called to the, I can't say that on record, but she was even trialed for that. So this is a problem that people face. And how can we create awareness without discussing it? There is always a thin edge between discussing and practicing it. When I say I discuss pornographic studies in my class, I do acknowledge you as adults of common sense. And just in case I cross any lines, I'm sure you are capable enough to reprimand me or to take me to the court. So I'm pretty much aware of the danger. And I think that's where that responsibility has to be taken up. And that's where we could dream of a world that Sarah was just a while ago talking about. It's not only about Pornhub. Take the case of any of those -- sites. Again, I'm not sure how many of you know, pornography is not banned in India, though certain sites are, but pornography is actually not banned in India. Watching pornography is not banned. Downloading it is a criminal offense. And we are the land of Kama Sutra, and we are talking about pornographic content. So it's really interesting. How should we look at porn? Whether we should embrace porn or whether we should keep it at a bay. This is a really individualistic question that I shall not force any comments on. But to say the least, I think I was able to discuss almost all the aspects of pornographic consumption over the last few centuries. And I hope this would serve as an inspiration or a motivation to you to write something. I think somebody has a question. Yes, Veena.
Sir,
So,
whatever it is, there will be dark side for porn industry also. Could you
Definitely.
please comment on that?
No, we have already spoken about that. Pornographic industry is something that promotes knowingly or unknowingly dominance, violence, and so on. There is this gender stereotypes that's being reinforced. There is racial undertones that's being reinforced. So those are all negatives of porn industry. No two ways about that. But one thing that I felt is pornography still tries to accumulate these minorities into it. There is this. That's why I said gay porn is one thing that has got assimilated into that streak of things. Maybe half a decade ago, it was unimaginable. Lesbian thought was, needless to say, inculcated because even men watched that. But then gay porn, to get into it as a category, is something that was not thought of. That has fueled the cause of LGBTQ. So in that sense, there are some positives to the pornographic industry as well. Monica, you were asking something.
Yes, yes, I just want to say that in spite of all these things, yet our culture is in a closed circuit. On the one hand, it wants to be propagating this thing, but on the other hand, there are social circles which delimits our thoughts and restricts to our their boundaries, restrictions. So we can't go beyond that.
Yeah, that's evident, right? That's where we began. We began with that video from Dirty Picture, where Vidya Balan says the same. You would despise me in the public, you would throw stones at me in the public, and you would go in darkness to the theaters to watch my movies, to watch me strip naked. It's quite true. And that's where I say body sensitization is something that's not common in our country. We still look at, say, let's take the case of dressing and gender. Short skirts and a woman walking. We look at that long legs, white legs, tall legs as something that's erotically appealing to us. It's not supposed to be. They're just legs. Let them be legs. Let them walk. Why should we look at the legs exposed by the short skirts as a erotic phenomenon? So that's where awareness and discussions lack, or that's where these delimitations make us suffer. All right, if there are no questions, let's wind up in another minute. Even though we take photographs only on the expert sessions today because it's the last session and there are only close to 10 people who have turned out, I would request you to have your cams on. Let's have a group photograph and part. And as we part, once again, let me remind you that we have a wonderful workshop coming up next month with a minimum of 9 sessions because we have 9 weekends next month, plus the Easter and Good Friday coming up. So we have a long month coming up, and we have a workshop on American literature coming up next month, which would be filled with a lot of interesting stories and plays and poems. So if you haven't enrolled it and if you want to enroll, please feel free to come. And those who have paid the fee, please make sure you have filled the Google Forms, and also do spread the word with your friends as well and urge them to enroll for the workshop. And trust me, American literature is my forte as well. So unlike these 3 months, maybe I would end up taking 4 to 5 sessions as well, because that's one paper that I'm really good at. And I love discussing Eugene O'Neill and Tennessee Williams. I like enacting the Glass Menagerie or the Cat on a Hot Tin Roof and so on. So if you like my sessions, please do enroll for American literature, because you will have a visual spectacle, an extravaganza queued up next month. If not, doesn't matter. There will be individual posters for some special sessions. You can join by paying the $200 or whatever is there for that back then. So on the count of 5, if you could please turn your cams on, we can have a photograph and say ta-da bye-bye for this month. 5, 4, 3, 2, I think I'm counting fast. 5, 4, 3, 2. Come on, guys! This is our last session this month. Please have your cams on. I have respected your privacy and your right to have your cam off. At least today, have it on. And Danusha, I think your cam was off yesterday. We couldn't have you in the photograph yesterday. You are someone who is generally there, but somehow we missed you out yesterday. So 5, 4, 3, 2. Kavya has left, maybe due to the network issue. I think I'll give her 10 more seconds to rejoin, just in case it was a technical error. It's okay, Amrita, I understand. You have your match practice. We see a great cricketer in the offing in you. One day, actually, we were having a good conversation, me and Amrita, and she was like, do you know about Indian women's cricket team? You know their names? And I'm like, why not? I know all of them. I'm a huge fan of Mithali Raj as well. So there's a biopic being made on Mithali Raj recently. So yeah, all right. So let's count 10 and we'll take a pick and we'll call it a day. 10 because Maybe Kavya would rejoin. So 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Say cheese. All right. So thank you so much, guys. Thanks for joining. It was my pleasure interacting with you. See you sometime soon. And up until then, good night and have a great time. Bye.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.